December 20th, 1987. The sea was calm. The night was warm. Thousands of passengers boarded a ferry called the Doña Paz. Men, women, children, entire families, all chasing the same dream, to reach Manila before Christmas. They carried gifts, they carried stories, they carried hope. But what they didn't know was that they were boarding a floating coffin. Because just hours later, as the ferry glided through the darkness, another vessel appeared on the horizon, a tanker loaded with nearly 9,000 barrels of gasoline. And in one shattering instant, the two ships collided. The result? A fireball so fierce it turned the sea itself into an inferno. Screams cut through the night, metal twisted, water boiled, and in less than half an hour, thousands of lives were erased. More than 4,000 souls gone. A death toll 3 times greater than the Titanic. And yet outside of Asia, almost no one has heard of this catastrophe. Why? Because this wasn't just an accident. It was the consequence of greed, negligence, and corruption. This is not the Titanic you know. This is the forgotten nightmare of the Doña Paz, the Asian Titanic. Every ship has a story. Some are born as legends. Others become legends only because of how they die. The Doña Paz began her life far from the Philippines in a Japanese shipyard in 1963. Back then, she was called the Himeyuri Maru, a modest passenger vessel built for routine voyages. Nothing glamorous, nothing historic, just another piece of steel on the endless ocean. For over a decade, she served quietly, carrying travelers from port to port. But in 1975, her fate changed. She was sold to a Philippine company, Sulpicio Lines, and reborn with a new name, Don Sulpicio. The Philippines, a nation of more than 7,000 scattered islands, relied on ships like these. Ferries weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. For Filipinos, boarding a ferry was as common as hopping on a bus in New York or catching a domestic flight in Los Angeles. Crowded decks, sweaty cabins, and salty air were part of the experience. But fate has a cruel sense of foreshadowing. In 1979, the vessel caught fire while docked in Manila Bay. Flames tore through the ship. Passengers panicked. Steel groaned under the heat. It was a warning, a fiery omen of what was to come. Most companies would have scrapped the wreck, but Sulpicio Lines saw money, not danger. The ship was rebuilt, repainted, and renamed. A fresh coat of paint, a new identity. And so, the Doña Paz set sail once again, as if nothing had happened. But scars don't disappear. They linger. And every voyage carried with it the shadow of that fire. By the mid-1980s, Doña Paz was a familiar sight on the waters of the Philippines. To ordinary passengers, it was just another ferry. Noisy, overcrowded, and imperfect, but affordable. They couldn't know that this ship would become their tomb. December in the Philippines is a season of homecomings. Families reunite, villages glow with lanterns, and ferries like the Doña Paz become highways of love and tradition. On December 20th, 1987, passengers swarmed aboard. Officially, the ferry was licensed to carry around 1,400 people, but tickets were oversold, families squeezed in, children slept on the floor, passengers clung to railings. By some estimates, nearly 4,400 souls were packed onto a vessel meant for a fraction of that number. Imagine boarding a Greyhound bus that should carry 50 passengers, and instead finding 150 crammed inside. Multiply that feeling by the scale of a ship, and you have the Doña Paz. For most, the discomfort was tolerable. They were going home for Christmas. Laughter filled the corridors. Vendors sold snacks. Some played cards under flickering lights. Others curled up in narrow bunks. Above deck, the night sky shimmered with stars. It was supposed to be an ordinary voyage, but ordinary was about to end. Unbeknownst to the passengers, another vessel was slicing through the same waters that night. The MT Vector, a tanker loaded with almost 9,000 barrels of gasoline and other petroleum products. A ticking time bomb on the sea. But the Vector was not in good shape. Its license had expired. Its crew was inadequately trained. Safety protocols were ignored. It was an accident waiting to happen. And fate brought these two ships together. Just before midnight, the paths of the Doña Paz and the Vector converged. Out on the dark waters, most passengers were asleep, unaware that danger was closing in. The few who remained awake, maybe smoking on deck, maybe whispering to one another, would become the first to see the glow of another ship on the horizon. Seconds stretched. Distances shrank, and then impact. The sound was deafening. Steel tore against steel. The Doña Paz shuddered violently, throwing passengers from their bunks. Some thought it was just turbulence. Others knew immediately something had gone terribly wrong. And then came the fire. The Vector's gasoline cargo ignited instantly, sending a wall of flame rushing across the water. The sea itself seemed to catch fire, turning black waves into rolling sheets of orange and red. Within moments, the Doña Paz was engulfed. Paint blistered, wood cracked, cabins became ovens. Passengers screamed, their voices drowned by the roar of fire and the twisting groan of the ship. Panic spread like wildfire. Families scrambled for exits, only to find corridors blocked. The ship had no adequate safety drills, no crew guiding people to lifeboats. In fact, the Doña Paz barely had functioning lifeboats at all. Imagine being trapped in a floating building, every exit sealed by fire. For thousands on board, that nightmare became reality. Eyewitnesses described the scene as hell itself. Flames raced across decks, swallowing entire sections of the ferry in seconds. People leapt into the sea, their clothes and hair ablaze. Mothers clutched their children. Friends tried to hold on to each other. But the sea offered no mercy. It was coated with gasoline, burning as fiercely as the decks above. Those who jumped were consumed by fire. Those who stayed were consumed by smoke. In less than 30 minutes, the Doña Paz was reduced to a floating torch. The ferry that had carried laughter and holiday dreams now carried only fire and screams. And then, silence. Out of the estimated 4,400 people on board, only 24 survived. Survivors later described clinging to debris, watching the sea burn around them, hearing the cries of thousands fade into the night. But even for those who lived, survival was not salvation. Rescue came late. Authorities were slow to respond. And when the survivors finally told their stories, they faced disbelief. How could a disaster of this magnitude have happened? When the final numbers were tallied, the Doña Paz tragedy became the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. More than 4,000 lives lost, families erased, generations gone. And yet, outside Asia, the disaster barely made headlines. In the United States, coverage was brief. No movies were made. No memorials stood tall. For many, the story never existed. Why? Because there was no luxury liner, no orchestra, no romanticized sinking. There was only fire, gasoline, and silence.
The sea has long been a keeper of secrets. Some, like the Titanic, are immortalized in films, books, and songs. But others vanish into silence, remembered only by those who suffered. The Doña Paz should be known everywhere. Its death toll eclipsed the Titanic several times over. It was a disaster of human error, greed, and negligence. And yet, for most of the world, it never happened. Why? Because there was no Hollywood film, no famous survivors to tell their tales, no romanticized orchestra playing as the ship sank, only fire, chaos, and silence. The voices of over 4,000 people were swallowed by the sea, their stories buried under corporate denial, political corruption, and global indifference. But tragedies like this demand to be remembered. They aren't just about the past, they're warnings about the present and the future. So the question remains, how many more lives must be lost before we listen? And now, I turn this over to you. If this story moved you, if you believe the victims of the Doña Paz deserve to be remembered, speak their names. Share this story. Keep it alive. Because history only survives when we tell it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, why do you think the world forgot about the Doña Paz? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, join our community, and help shine a light on the tragedies history tried to erase. Because silence is the real grave, and together we can break it.